Next up, we have Will. Will and his team at AITHENA, I love because they all have different backgrounds. So they've got backgrounds in pharma, but they all have NHS experience. Will is going to be talking to us today about MLR review and where and if AI has a place for it. We think it does, it's coming, but it'll be really interesting because I think what AI is really good at is some of your day-to-day stuff. So think small, what can I do to improve my admin? But we're here, it's like, what big processes can we really improve? And I know they're doing a great things at AITHENA, so I'm super excited about this. And hi, Will, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm gonna hand it over to you and look forward to listening, so thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Will. I'm the director and co-founder of Athena. Prior to building AI and software development, I was in the pharmaceutical industry for quite a long time, predominantly in medical affairs as a reviewer and a signatory, a little bit of time in commercial, but enough time to recognize how big a problem MLR review can be. So the objective really of today is to really set yourself up for success, to understand, where these AI MLR systems can really add value, but also just to go in with your eyes open in terms of understanding what can they do, what to look out for, and how to make sure they're going to fit your organizational needs. So I think Jon Snow said it best, winter is coming. And if you're in the UK like me, it's pretty miserable outside. Winter is definitely coming, but also AI MLR is coming. And this is something we spoke about a couple of years back as a possibility. And now actually companies are using AI in their MLR process. And I pretty much guarantee that over the next 3 to 5 years, that everyone on this call will be using some type of AI in their MLR process. So it's really important we start to understand what the capabilities of these systems are and how do we use them in the best way to get the results that we want. Before I start, it'd be good to get a sense of, what are your biggest issues with MLR review? When we talk about the medical, legal, and regulatory review, what are you seeing? Are you seeing review cycles being an issue, the back and forth between different colleagues being an issue, the quality of materials going in? Is that your biggest issue? What do you kind of think is the biggest issues in your process? I'll just let people put that in the chat. Sense of comments, yes, I can relate to that one. Time, that's a big one. And also we don't really recognize the cost of that time as well. Yeah, culture can be a big one. Different reviewers, different marketeers can have different interpretations of the rules, laws, and the commitments. A long and slow process. So I think we're all pretty much agreed that this current process is not optimized currently to what it should be. And look, we've all been there. We've all been at the end of this, a brand new campaign coming out that needs to go out tomorrow, or a conference is happening tomorrow, or a speaker slot is happening tomorrow. And it's always last minute because these processes take so long. The average company spends about 15 days to get a piece of material approved. And there's always that kind of, that moment where the signatory says, I can't approve it. It could be the PI's wrong. It could be something more complicated around claims. But we've all been there. And as a signatory, I've been in a scenario, like probably many of you have as well, where you check something that's so low quality that you've got so many comments and feedback for that document. And then it comes back around. And to be fair, the marketeer teams, they do make the corrections, they do change the material, but then you find something else you missed the first time. And then they get really angry at you because you missed it. And it's like, well, it's human nature. We can only do so much. And, if we get material that's of poor quality consistently, we are going to miss something at some point. And this process hasn't really changed. The biggest change we've had is going from physical job bags, which some of you in the call might remember, to a more electronic system. But it didn't really help speed up the process because there's a large number of bottlenecks within the process at every stage. There's the feedback between the reviewer and the marketeers. There's the changes being made between the creative agency and the marketing team. And then the discussion about, what claims are acceptable between the reviewer and the signatory. And it's not unreasonable that happens. Like the number of checks that needs to happen is quite astounding. I think we take for granted what our reviewers do. They're looking at so many different aspects of a document. It's amazing how they can do this consistently day in, day out. But the reality is, there's so much to check, there's so much to do, and there's so much time pressure, low quality materials, and also just the sheer volume and lack of resource that we still make mistakes. If we look at the recent PMCPA cases of the last 12 months, this is from June of this year to last year, the majority of issues are avoidable errors. By three-quarters of them are avoidable errors in materials. So things like, silly things like missing mandatory information, but then more complex things about, claims which are misleading. So these are a lot of things that we should be picking up, and they shouldn't be getting through the door. So clearly, not only is this costing a lot of time, a lot of money, but we're not always getting it right. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. And I hope you're liking the Game of Thrones theme, because there's going to be much more of it as we go through the presentation. But there's lots and lots of materials coming through, and with omnichannel coming through, there's even more. And we've heard about omnichannel for many years now, and I've yet to see a pharma company that's been able to do it really well. And my personal opinion is probably because the amount of material to make that come to life is almost too difficult to approve. Email fragments, websites, videos, all of this stuff needs to happen in tandem to make a really good omnichannel strategy. And with the resource we have in the approval process, I just don't think we're there yet. And all it takes is for one final boss material like a website or detail aid, and the whole process just grinds to a halt. I mean, I challenge anyone to go onto 5 big pharma websites, and I guarantee you will find a couple of pages that say down for maintenance or coming back soon. And it's because they find something that is wrong, they've had to take it down, or they're going to update the site, and it just takes too long to get through. And sometimes we just abandon this altogether because it just takes too long to approve. So it's not for want of trying to fix this problem. And we've tried many things. And I'm sure a lot of you have implemented checklists. So getting people further down the compliance chain at the content creation level to think of, here's some of the checks you must do before you submit your material. And these have helped weed out some of the really, really common errors. But the problem is that we can't think of everything. There's so many variants. You've got banner ads, which need particular checks. You've got videos, you've got webinars, you've got websites. There's so many different combinations of compliance checks needed that, if you'd have a dictionary of checklists to actually do that. So a lot of that comes with experience and time. And not all reviewers or content creators have had that experience or time. We've tried SOPs as well. So, where a company's got a particular stance on a compliance area. For example, I know some companies in their emails, they'll put in promotional in the header, and other companies will not do that. And, it's not something in the code is mandatory. There's interpretations of it. But some companies just set out their stance, which helps people not have the same conversations over and over again. But they still creep in time and time again. We have debates about what we can and can't do, especially when new people come on board, or the brand teams change, or we get a whole new campaign. And training has helped, but it doesn't really fix the root problem of the whole process. Although it keeps us up to date in what we need to know about the compliance field and what's happened in terms of case precedent, certainly in the UK, we're still making the same mistakes. Even the basic stuff we're still not getting right. And for the first time, we've actually got something which may actually solve this problem. AI promises some really great technology to help us actually, for once, change how we do it. It could be the biggest change we see in this whole process. But before we get into that, what part of the MLR review process would you like to see AI have the greatest impact? And in this poll, I've specifically on purpose not said all of the above, because I'm really keen for you to tease out which area do you think you want it to improve the most. Really interesting. And they're not mutually exclusive either. So some of them kind of fold into each other, but absolutely detecting potential errors earlier, and repetitive manual checks definitely is something that AI may be able to help us with. Great insight. Okay, so the next slide. Now, what I would say is, before we kind of go on this journey, the bar for AI MLR, I think, is really high. I think it's really high. To take the Iron Throne, as it were, I think these systems have to be good enough to review like a reviewer and almost do it better. Because you'll all know this process has been around for years, and to even introduce a system like this, it's going to require a lot of change management. It's going to get people doing things differently, putting their trust in a system that they've not used before, and understanding how to use that system with a human in the loop approach. So it's quite a big infrastructural change to make. So if you're not putting a system in there that's good enough for the review, you're just going to cause more problems already in a process that is straining under the pressure. So my perspective, I think, is that these systems have to be really, really good. And also you've got to be familiar with how good they are. And when you get past the wall and you're committed to going down this avenue, trying to find an AI MLR review software, there's probably three things I think you need to think about. And in terms of, there's many things I think, in the last talk as well, there's so many things you need to consider. But for me, as an end user, I would say there's probably three things are really important: the scope, the quality, and the maintainability of these systems. And as somebody who develops this type of software, I recognize that these three, they're not mutually exclusive. There is interchangeability between three. So if you increase the quality, that might reduce the maintainability. If you reduce the maintainability, you might reduce the scope. So these things do have trade-offs between the three of them, but you need to really understand how the system performs in these kind of three kind of key areas, because it's really going to affect what you get out at the end of those reviews. So I'm going to go through each one. Now, this is going to be a little bit technical, so do grab your coffee and strap in, but I'll try and go through it as high level as possible. So, scope. The first thing you need to ask is, what will this system actually check? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that these systems could look at and may not look at. And you really got to establish, what can it do? What won't it do? And potentially in the roadmap, what will it do in the future? Because a lot of these companies may do something today, but will promise something in the future. So you really need to understand what the scope today and also the future will be. But there's a whole bunch of things you need to think about. So for example, will it check references? Will it check the citations? Will it cross-reference the references? Will it match the reference of the claim? Will it substantiate the claim? What assets will it look at? Will it look at banners, websites, videos, the hard copy, digital, emails, media briefing documents? Like, what is the spectrum of materials that you can actually feed it and it can review? Will it check claims? Does it know what a claim is? How do you define a claim? How is it substantiating the claim? Will it look at mandatory information? So like the simple stuff, like a black triangle or prescribing information or particular label requirements. LLMs are really good with text, but will it look at images? Is it going to look at graphs, tables, and charts? So, I've seen many materials where the text and the claims are absolutely fine, but you will have an image which conveys either another indication or conveys a statement about the medicine, which is just inappropriate. So will the LLM be able to do that? Will the system do that? Will it have TA knowledge? So kind of bring in a world of knowledge about an area like neuroscience or diabetes or cardiovascular health and use that as inference and context to help it do the review of the claims that you're providing. We'll look at promo and non-promo. They're very different workflows. Promotional and non-promotional material has got its own set of requirements. Can it do both? Can it do both well? And what rules will it look at? Is it local or global rules? So we'll look at broad global rules like FPA, or go into the details of like ABPI code for the UK, for example. We'll look at your brand guidelines, your core claims, your particular the ways you do trademarks. We'll have your SOPs built in, so the things that you've decided this is what we're comfortable with. Will it take that into consideration? And also, like, what file formats will it take? Will it take images? Will it take videos? Will it take text? Will it take PDFs, PowerPoints? These are all the questions you need to understand and think about, what will actually the system actually do today and also in the future. The next thing to think about is, once you know what it will look at, what approach will it take to review that material? Now, this area is really, really nuanced, and I thought Emma did a great job of talking about the different types of models and ways of doing it. I'm just going to give you a really high-level overview, but it is a bit more nuanced than this, but I'm trying just to explain it in a way that maybe will resonate a bit with you. So the three ways you can roughly do this, the first is like a GenAI wrapper. And what this is very similar to, let's say you go on ChatGPT, you get your leave piece, you put it into ChatGPT, and also you put in, I don't know, the ABPI code of practice and say, hey, check this against the ABPI code of practice and tell me if there's anything wrong. Now, it will look at it, it will apply the code, but it's going to miss a lot of things because it doesn't really know how to implement that information. Like, it won't know the concept of a job bag or the concept of, what a claim is or what references does it need or the broader knowledge that's required to review that document. And it'll really have no boundaries in what it looks at. So it's probably not a great way to review a document, but this is how early companies started to try and do this. Then you've got a rule-based system, which is where you have experts, compliance experts, defining all the rules and checks needed for every type of material. And that helps the AI know, when I see this material, I apply this rule every time consistently. And this works really well as long as you defined all the possible rules, because if you don't define the rules, it won't get checked. And then a fine-tuned model is almost like training a model on hundreds of thousands of data points, good data points curated by an expert, that the model understands what to do in a given situation because it has so many data points to do that. It can be very accurate, but one of the problems can be is if you don't have a lot of data or you don't have good data, it can give you the wrong answers. So it's really important. It only takes a few bad data points in a big data set for a fine-tuned model not to work very well. Now that sounds very high level, so I'm going to try and make an analogy here to bring this to life. So I love coffee. I'm sure many of you love coffee. So let's think about this as like a coffee shop. So the GenAI wrapper is like we've all been in a situation where you're away from home, you need a coffee, but you can't find a chain store, you can't find a Costa or a Starbucks. So you find a local cafe and you go in and you want the flat white. You look at the menu and there's no flat white, but you ask for one anyway. And the barista says, yeah, I'll make you one. And what you get at the end of it is not quite a flat white. It's kind of cross between a cappuccino and a latte. And it's not very good, but they give it a good go because they understood the concept and were able to kind of give you something that resembled a flat white. That's like your GenAI wrapper. The rule-based system is like going to your chain store, so going to like a Starbucks or Costa, and you order a flat white and they've got the exact recipe for you. So you get the same coffee every time as intended. But if you wanted any modifications, like let's say you want a double shot of espresso or you wanted oat milk instead of normal milk, then you'd have to predefine that at the start. Otherwise, you're not going to get that. And your fine-tune model is a little bit like going to your artisanal coffee shop and you've been there for years and years and they know you by name. And all you need to say is, I'd like my coffee. And they'll make you your flat white with your extra shot and your oat milk without you even asking because it's learned about your patterns over time. Now, that can be really good, but if that barista goes on holiday or that the shop changes staff, they've got to learn all those preferences again. So you can see there's pros and cons to each approach, but this is roughly how they work from a lay perspective. The next kind of bucket you need to look at is reliability. So from a reliability perspective, you want to look at, LLMs are prone to hallucinations. It's kind of the way they were designed. They want to give you an answer. The less they know, the more they'll guess, and they don't always check their work. And these systems do work differently with hallucinations. So your general wrapper, they can be quite difficult to constrain because they look at everything. So hallucinations are quite common. In rule-based systems, if you've defined your rules very tightly, you can almost avoid quite a lot of the hallucinations, but you've got to be very careful with your guardrails. And for fine-tuning models, they're really good because they've got their data set, they've practiced a lot of data points. But if you ask them something completely outside their knowledge base, they can hallucinate. And a good example recently is you've probably seen, ChatGPT tell me what the seahorse emoji looks like. And there is no seahorse emoji. And if you ask it, it'll just go round and round trying to find the answer because it's got no training data on that emoji. It doesn't exist. So you've got to be really careful on how these systems have been designed and how they put the guardrails in to ensure that they're reliable and don't hallucinate. The next thing that's probably the most important is consistency and concordance. So this basically really is do the AI and the reviewer agree? So if there's an error, does the AI agree? If there's not an error, does the AI say the same thing? Now, on one end of the spectrum, you don't want false negatives. You don't want the AI to miss stuff. This is really where the bar should be high. So your system should not be missing things. Because if it does, well, one, it's inefficient because you're going to have to check to make sure those errors are picked up by a human reviewer. But it's risky because if you put too much reliance on it, things are going to slip through the net. So on this perspective, you've got to be really make sure that your false negative rate is very, very low for these systems. For general models, it can be quite high, but the rule-based models and the fine-tuning models tend to have less of these if they're designed well. But the real fine art in these systems is false positives, because you want to strike a really good balance between not the AI not picking up everything and being super sensitive and saying, I find all of these errors or potential errors. And as a reviewer, you're looking at it being like, that's just being very overcautious. That's not right. That's not right. It's too burdensome to go through a whole list of false positives. And it's inefficient because you're spending a lot of time doing it. And it's risky because you're going to get complacent because you're going to look at all these errors and say, most of them are not errors and you're going to miss something. The fine art is being able to, this LLM or the AI MLR, to be able to serve up issues which are genuinely require human in the loop review. So we've all been in a situation where you may think a claim is absolutely fine, but your colleague looks at it and thinks, I think that could be a bit misleading. Those are the types of errors or potential errors you want the system to flag up. And this is what separates the good systems from the great systems, because the systems that are really, really good can serve up the stuff that's worth a conversation and actually keep the other stuff at bay in terms of not pulling up these false positives. So this is really where you need a compliance expert to help with these false positives, because otherwise you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff that is just not, in practice, is not an error or something that would cause a breach. And another point on quality is explainability. I think Emma mentioned this really well in the last presentation. But a lot of these systems can be a bit of a black box. You've got no idea how they've come to their conclusions. And what's really important is, you need to understand, what did it check? What did it not check? And how did it arrive at those conclusions? And I think there's two real reasons for that. One is you have to have confidence that these systems can work well. So you want to see how they've come to those conclusions and what it's checked. You want to check in on time to time again to make sure that, yes, this material did the right checks, it picked this up, but didn't think it was an issue. At the same time, you also want an audit trail as well. So in compliance, if something does go wrong, you want to be able to go back and see, well, where did it go wrong and how can we improve? And if it's a black box, you're not going to be able to detangle what happened in the AI system and where the error kind of potentially fell through the net. So explainability is really important. So you really need to understand what the system needs to give you the opportunity to see how it came to its conclusions and what it checked and what it didn't check. And then finally, maintainability. So the world moves quite fast in AI, but also in the regulatory space. We get new laws like every few years from different markets. How is the system going to handle that? How quick can you implement those changes? You don't want to be sitting around for 3 to 4 months while the system gets updated before they actually have an effect, because then you're going to have more human loops and more manual review while that's being changed. You get new asset types. When the iPhone came out, we started approving apps. That wasn't a thing before we had smartphones. And now we're going to have to approve AI chatbots. That's a new asset type. So how is the system going to adapt to these new asset types, which require their own set of rules and own types and specifications? Also, for new therapy areas and new drugs, can it do it out of the box? Can it look at any therapy area or any drug you put into it, or does it have to be specifically fine-tuned for a particular area? Because that can take quite a long time. And can it adapt to new clinical evidence? So if you've got a new study out, can it use that as reference? Can it use that as context? Also, company SOPs, as we talked about earlier, if you've now taken a position on a certain part of compliance, how quickly can you get that implemented into your review cycle? And also we have case precedents, certainly in the UK, where we learn new stuff every month about what's gone wrong, how it can be prevented, and sometimes we need to change how we review materials in light of that new information. So it's really important we know how quickly these systems can be maintained so that we can be ensured that how much downtime will we have if we have to go with one solution versus another. So I've gone through quite a lot there. And I think, the reality is that we all have to upskill ourselves really quickly on this stuff, because a lot of this technology is going to come in, and it could come in from different parts of the company. It could come in from a global team, it could come from a local team. But at some point you'll be asked the question about these types of software. And I guess for me, as a user of the software, the things you need to be thinking about is, what is in scope? What will it actually do? How good is the review and what are the limitations? Is it explainable, the review? How difficult is it to maintain? And one we didn't really touch on, but who's built it and how are they evaluating it? I mean, I'm probably quite biased, but my view is that you have to have someone in compliance in this team. If you're looking at these companies with AI MLR, they have to have come from pharma, or they have to have at least compliance experts in their team, because this area is so nuanced. It's so nuanced that we can't seem to get it right in our organizations, never mind an external coming in and trying to do it. So I think you have to have really good knowledge of compliance to be able to execute these systems really well. So for me, it's the final point in the future. This is going to be the biggest change I think we have had in our compliance process. And it's going to change rapidly. I think what's going to happen is these systems will come in as pilots, probably further down the compliance chain. So maybe at the quality check, the marketing manager, maybe at the medical review stage. But ultimately, they're going to go further and further down to where the source of the errors come from. So that's the content creation side. And I think at some point, we will have fully generated AI content coupled with AI review. And these teams, we will be doing less reviewing and we'll do more orchestration of how to create whole campaigns with our specific guardrails and specific objectives. And the AI will do a lot of the manual work in terms of the creation and also the review. So It's a scary time. It's also quite exciting. It will create a lot of efficiency, but I think we just need a word of caution and a real go under our eyes kind of wide open in terms of what these systems will do, making sure we make the right choice. So I hope that's been interesting. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I am from Athena, and we do have our own system for this. It's called Miracle. If you're interested in trying our system, trying to break it, seeing how it works in your material, seeing how it works with errors, comparing it to your own reviewers, do let us know. We'd love to give you a demo. We'd love to let you have a play around with it. So if you're interested, do get in contact either directly or via the website. But thank you for listening.
Will, you just delivered a whole talk on MLR without mentioning reference packs. You did mention job bags, so
I did mention references. I did mention
yes,
references.
Very good. So I really like how you broke that down and explained the technology behind it, because one of the things that kind of scares me a little bit about some of these tools is, like in the UK, you were a reviewer in the UK. I want to know that you have checked for everything on the ABPI code. So I really liked your point around explainability. So thank you. I've got lots and lots of questions, which probably suggest what a big pain point this is for everyone. So what will MLR timelines be in the future? You kind of touched on that just then with the content piece, content and AI and review linked together.
It's an interesting question. I would say we're seeing, from a review perspective, a 90% reduction.
Amazing.
So now that number can get complicated. It depends where you timeline. So you've got how much time is actually on review in the system reviewing, how much time is discussion, how much is idle time. One thing that AI will really clear up very quickly is idle time. So when you've got material ready, when it's going to be reviewed. At the minute it sits in someone's Viva, ProMat, or Vidori, or whatever system they use, until the reviewer picks it up. But in AI, it can be done immediately. And also it can be done in parallel. So you can run 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 work streams all at one time. So I think that's where you're going to save a lot of time. In terms of the actual approval time, I mean, as long as these systems are designed in the right way, you should see a very significant drop. I mean, you'd be going from like 15 days probably to like a day or less. This will require a change in how we do things, though. So you'd be looking at triaging, materials which require definite human in the loop for a review in addition to signatory, and then materials that go straight to signatory. So lower risk materials, repeatable materials, or things which are
sizes.
Exactly.
This is a good one. What do you think the biggest pain points are for AI uses in MLR? Because I know you've probably lost a few nights' sleep doing this with building your own tool from scratch.
Do you mean in terms of like the technology?
I'd go techie, Will.
Yeah. So the biggest pain point, I would say, developing AI MLR, and something everyone needs to be aware of, is extracting text. It sounds very boring, but it's really hard. So many materials come in all sorts of weird and wonderful formats. So PDF, for example, but no one PDF is created equal. LLMs can only make decisions on what they can actually see in quotations. And you could put in a leaf piece and it may extract 50% of the text, and the rest of it, it wasn't able to extract. So the Achilles heel for a lot of these systems is how well can they extract the information from what you put in and then serve it up to the LLM in a way the LLM understands. That is where there will be a difference between different companies that do this type of software. It's a huge area. I mean, and not just in MLR, it's a huge issue in general, because we want to use AI for more and more applications, and it's only useful if you can read the documents.